Hi, welcome to Smart Training 365. If you want maximum results from your resistance training with minimum wasted time, effort, and injury risk, make sure you subscribe to our channel. What we share here will definitely help you. Share and like if you enjoyed our video, and make sure to leave us your comments in the comment section.
The direction of the resistance is wrong for that movement. That's number one. Number two is he said something very interesting. Did you notice he said you want the most range of motion?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You're not stretching. You're stopping when your arm is hanging straight down, but your front deltoid stretches when your arm is back. You can't go that direction for a couple of reasons. One is because there's no resistance back there, and the other is because doing so would cross the base, right, and would create a swinging movement, right? So what you need to do is get on your back and either do a front press that creates that movement with your elbows at your side. Yes, notice if you do a front press, your upper arms are traveling the exact same trajectory that exercise was, but now the front end is loaded. The back end is diminished. That's better. That's more productive. Plus, you're going to be able to get your stretch. You can't get a stretch there. The other thing there too is that, there's no way for you to really know where that motion ends. Right? So you might say, well, do I stop here? Do I stop here? Do I stop here? Where do I stop? Well, the problem with that is you don't really know where your front deltoid contracts. And apparently neither does he. It actually contracts right about there, which is just shy of perpendicular to your body. That's why if you're on a flat bench or on a decline bench, which is what I recommend, a slight decline angle, front press, so that when your arms get vertical, you are ending at that point of contraction. That tells you where to end. That tells you where to stop, right? This other exercise doesn't. So the other exercise he was showing you was a side deltoid exercise. And he thought he was being clever by having you angle your body like this and go across the front of your body. The problem is the first thing I hope you noticed was you were crossing the base, right? So there was a swinging past the base that inevitably will happen. I guarantee you, if you do that exercise, you will feel that swinging sensation and you will be tempted to use a heavier and heavier weight because you can swing that heavier weight and it'll create the illusion that you're stronger, that you're building the deltoid better. But in fact, what you're doing is every time you swing across your body, you're letting that weight fall, right? That's not range of motion, right? Once you pass your body, that's it, right? It's going to swing, and at least 2/3 of the way up will be momentum. The last third will be some, not 100% deltoid activity, but some of that range of motion will still be carrying it into that up position. The other reason why that's bad is because crossing your arm in front of your body, for those of you that sleep on your side, try sleeping on your side like that and ask yourself, is that comfortable on my shoulder? No, you're actually distorting the shoulder. You're actually taking the ball of the humerus slightly out of the socket. You're actually having to sort of separate it, right? So the safest thing to do is to start with your arm right at your side. You're not going to benefit at all by increasing the stretch. And by the way, it doesn't stretch. You'll notice that, experiment with that and try that and say, am I actually feeling a stretch of the side delta? No, you are not. What you're doing is you're just basically changing the anatomy of your shoulder joint and just crossing it across. It's creating more joint risk than it is any muscle advantage. So, and of course, you've got that swinging sense. The best thing to do on a side raise is to be either horizontal or at a slight incline. Start from your hip. Be early phase loaded. Let the deltoid experience more resistance at the beginning and less at the top when it gets weaker. That's the way to do it. And again, a lot of people like variety. And a lot of people that are watching something like this, they'll say, I like this guy. I like his recommendation because he offers a lot of variety. It's like, hello, variety isn't good. Why not? Because the muscle does one thing best. Imagine asking for variety of air. Can you get variety of air? Can you do helium? Can you do nitrogen? No, air singularly works best, right? So the idea that you would seek variety in air or breathable gas is foolish. Likewise in biomechanics, each muscle does one thing best. It's not, it does a variety of things best. It can't. It does one thing best. It early fades loads best. It aligns best. Its range of motion is best. Every single factor of the 15 factors that determine what makes an exercise ideal is singular. When you narrow it down, you go, which of all these exercises meets all 15 of these criteria, you find that really only one or two are best. Anything else you do has to break away from those factors, has to lose 1, 3, 5, 8 of those factors, thereby diminishing its value. It's as simple as that. I mean, I hate to burst a bubble, but the fact is resistance exercise should be much simpler than we've been told.
Okay. Let's move on to the second exercise. The second exercise we can do can target the front delts in much the same way, and it's just an incline front dumbbell raise. So instead of always doing them standing up, just sit down on this slight incline bench and you will see that your shoulder will naturally fall back behind your body. Placing again that slight stress on the front delt that leads right into every repetition, each one a more powerful contraction because it takes advantage of that stretch reflex.
Okay. The first thing I'll say is the term stretch reflex is bogus. Stretch reflex suggests that your front delta would act like a rubber band and that somehow getting into a stretch position somehow propels it forward. It does not create a reflex. Stretch is good. This exercise wasn't as bad as the previous ones we looked at. The fact that now your arm is able to go past your torso and allow your front delta to stretch is a good thing. Okay, so let's parse it. Some good, some bad. Okay, I noticed that when you went forward, the palms were facing down. Okay, problem with that, right? Because when the palm is facing down, the elbow is facing out. When the elbow is facing out, the front deltoid is on top, opposite the downward resistance. In other words, as soon as you do that, you take away, you reduce the participation in the front deltoid and you increase the participation in the side deltoid. You need to keep your elbow pointing down, your thumb pointing up, maybe even your palm up, depending on what it takes to get your elbow to point down, right? And once you do that, then you get your front delta to be on top, your side delta to be on the side, away from the opposing resistance. So if you really want to focus on front deltoid, do not have a palm down grip. Always have either a hammer or a palm up grip. Where that exercise becomes less than ideal is very simply that the degree of back isn't far enough. It would be better if it was flat or even decline, right? Because you'll discover if you try that, especially if you try with your hands like this, you'll discover that at the end of the range of motion, you still have too much resistance, right? You want less resistance at the end of the range of motion than that exercise will allow. And what'll end up happening is you'll end up swinging that weight because you'll sense, you'll feel that you can't hold that weight in that contracted position. Try doing that. Try doing that exercise and try using a weight that allows you to actually hold it. There is some weight that you actually can, right? I don't know what it is, but let's just say for the moment it's 15 pounds in each hand, right? What you'll find is when you get down here, it's too light. If it feels like it's giving you something down here, like maybe a 20 or 25 pound dumbbell, then you'll feel that you can't hold it up at the top. That's proof that you've got the resistance curve wrong. The resistance curve should allow you to end the range of motion and hold it. And if you can't hold it, that means you've got the wrong resistance curve, the wrong direction of resistance relative to your body.
Perfect. Okay, we're gonna move to the next, third exercise. And for those who wants to know the best movements, how you set them up and why they are the best, you can buy the book, The Physics of Resistance Exercise from Doug Brignole, or you can also buy the online course, which will show you how these exercises are set up, and you can even become certified in biomechanics. And if you're just looking for a program to show you how you use these exercises in like a program that suits your level, then True Bodybuilding will be the best program for you. If you want to build those big perfect shoulders, make sure that you're not limiting the heavy stuff to just the overhead pressing exercises. That will be the same thing as if you just did a heavy close grip bench press where you're trying to build your triceps and you went light on every other exercise like dips, skull crushers, or maybe even triceps push down. There's a bigger capacity to grow here. If you extend those heavy exercise options in your arsenal, so what I'm suggesting is you increase the weight on all the raises that you do, front, side, and real raises. Let's talk about the front first. This exercise is just a heavier than usual dumbbell raise. Again, what's actually interesting here is not necessarily what you're doing on the way up, but what you're doing on the way down that sparks the muscle growth, because we know that a forced heavy eccentric is going to be one of the three main drivers of muscle growth. And it's one that you don't want to ignore when you're trying to build perfect shoulders.
Okay, so I always think it's funny when these internet gurus, these fitness internet gurus, give their pitch. They try to use a lot of technical sounding terminology, and they sort of take a little bit of truth here and there. And by the way, what ends up happening most of the time is that these internet gurus, by the way, are people that are just like you and me. They're people that were exposed to a lot of stuff, right? They're people that have read the magazines, that are people that have seen other people's videos, right? And so basically they pick and choose what they think they can wrap up into their particular spin on this thing. And then they try to make it different so that you think you're getting a value. Yes, it's true. Using a heavier weight does build more muscle. Hello? Right? Now, the trick here, of course, is using more weight deliberately with the right range of motion and the right resistance curve, right? So a lot of times you get someone using a heavier weight with a partial range of motion or with an improper resistance curve, as that last exercise was. That's the improper resistance curve. That is like the tricep kickback. It's loading the end phase of the range of motion and giving you nothing, zero, in the early phase of the range of motion where your deltoids, where any muscle is strongest. So there's not much to critique about that other than the fact that, you know, that exercise will be, well, you can see, you can compare that to that incline version we just saw, right? You can say, well, it's the same motion, right? What's different? The resistance curve, the direction of resistance relative to the angle of the body, right? So the incline was the better version of these two, right? Mm-hmm. But even the incline one wasn't the best version, because the best version would be more horizontal or slight decline even. I just did these last night. I did them on a slight decline and they're fantastic, right? But not with a straight arm. I do them with a bent arm because I can. In other words, if I could do side deltoids if I could do a side raise with a bent arm, if my elbow could bend sideways, then I would, because using a slightly shorter lever allows you to use a slightly heavier weight without the drastic magnification caused by a longer lever, right? But we can't bend our elbow sideways, so that's why we're forced to do it this way. If I could attach the cable or the weight right to the end of my elbow, I would prefer it, but I can't do that, right? And as soon as you bend your elbow and go like this, now you've rotated the side deltoid away from the direction of resistance and the direction of movement. So that's why it doesn't work. But on front deltoid, it does work, right? So there's no reason why you can't take advantage of that by doing a front press, elbows in close to your side, letting your humerus, your upper arm, move toward the origin of the front deltoids and let that muscle shorten and elongate. That's all you need to do. It's that simple, right? These other things about hand positions and look, this is just too complicated, right? Your muscle knows what it wants. You may not, but it knows what it wants. It wants early phase loading. It wants full range of motion, including full elongation. It wants a proper resistance curve, and it has no eyes or ears. It doesn't know what you're actually holding in your hand. It doesn't know whether you're lying down or sitting up or hanging upside down. All it knows is, am I getting full range of motion? Am I getting early phase loading? am I getting the right trajectory? That's all it knows. All of this other stuff is fluff. As soon as you change something, it doesn't know anything other than you just took away one of the best of the 15 factors. That's all it knows, which is bad.
All right. Let's watch the cheat lateral. Likewise, we can pick up a heavier than usual dumbbell and do a lateral raise the same way. We call this a cheat lateral. And again, even if I have to utilize a little bit of that momentum to muscle it up to the top, the goal is to try and to slow the descent of the dumbbell down, control that eccentric, and provide that impetus for growth.
Listen, eccentric is important. I'm not going to take that away. Controlling the downward trajectory of a weight, of a resistance, of the limb that's holding that weight is valuable. It's always valuable. If you want to start splitting hairs and asking yourself the question, is there any value in lowering a weight that's heavier than you can actually lift? Right now, as I said, I've been doing this for over 40 years, so I've seen everything. I've seen bodybuilders get on a bench press, their buddy lifts it up for them, and then they resist it down with obviously a heavier weight than they would be able to lower it down if they could also do the concentric part. I encourage you to Google the research on that. You'll find that, theoretically, it might make a little bit of a difference. My experience, however, has been that it has not made a big difference. I have tried using a heavier eccentric than I could possibly handle concentrically. And it has not resulted in noticeable muscle growth, right? Again, he's just trying to pad this thing with a lot of little techniques and tricks. Try it. The one thing I will say there is the arm was raised too high. Now, he was telling us that the reason why you need to raise the arm up that high is to get the benefit of holding the downward eccentric.
Right.
But moving the arm higher than the shoulder blade invites impingement, invites pinching of the supraspinatus tendon and the subacromial bursa that are in between the top outer edge of the shoulder blade and the rising upper arm bone called the humerus, right? So you pinch that anytime you bring your arm up higher than parallel to the ground, perpendicular to your body. And of course, the higher you go, the worse it is. So, and that's why overhead presses, one of the reasons why overhead presses are so bad is because you just really, really invite impingement syndrome, which is an inflammation or a rupture of that tendon and of that bursa. But I also noticed that there was a little bit of a throw in that backward direction, and that could be risky. You don't want to do that. If you're raising your arm up, you want to raise it up completely straight to the side. None of this going on. You want to bring it straight up to the side and back down. Straight up to you're bringing the insertion toward the origin. Boom, boom. You don't want to rotate that arm because there's no benefit to it and there's risk.
So it's not a good exercise.
Well, let me just start by saying that a standing side raise, just a standing regular side raise without cheating it, without throwing it, without trying to emphasize the eccentric, without rotating it, that exercise in and of itself is not the best exercise to begin with. It's not a bad exercise. It's just not, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give a standing side raise a 7 because it's not early phase loaded. Now, the deltoid is an interesting muscle because you can actually get more from the standing side raise with dumbbell, despite the fact that it's end phase loaded, than you can from tricep kickbacks, which is also an end phase loaded exercise. And it has something to do with the length of the lever and the fact that, when you start here and you end here, you still get 100% of the range of motion. When you do a tricep kickback, you don't. You miss that whole first part of the range of motion. So there's other factors. But to say that exercise was bad, we just saw that cheat side raise. To say it was bad, we'd have to first say, well, what is good about a perfectly straight, non-cheating side raise? Okay, it's a 7. you added this cheating thing. Did you make it an 8? Did you make it a 9? Did you improve it? No. You actually brought it the other way. You actually made it now a 6 or a 5, because now you've added this momentum to it, right? And that rotation to it. And I would, if I were going to do one or the other, from a productivity, efficiency, and safety standpoint, I would do the standing side raise strict, without cheating, with as much weight as my side deltoid could handle, not throwing it, not swinging it, certainly always, letting it down slowly, always on every exercise. I wouldn't call it a bad exercise, but it's worse than a standing side raise normally.
Okay. And we don't want to limit to just those two heads. We can attack the rear delts in very much the same way. As a matter of fact, we know one of the best ways to build the rear delts is to overload the extension of the shoulder, because a simple seated cable row is actually one of the greatest ways to build your rear delts. And it's typically done with very heavy weights. But if you wanted to go and stick strictly to dumbbells, I have two other options here. I can simply sit at the end of the bench and do this little bit of abbreviated or scarecrow row, where I'm just bringing my elbows up to my sides, very short range of motion. And I could feel that, because again, these muscles don't typically use heavier weights. Or I can do the rear delt row, which is one of my favorite ways to train the rear delts heavier, by simply leaning up against the rack, pulling that arm back behind the body with a little bit of twist of the shoulder into external rotation, which will absolutely light up your delts. But the fact of the matter, none of these have to be done with light weights, and the additional weight here is enough to spark the growth you're seeking.
Well, again, mixing a little bit of truth in there with a lot of falsehood. First of all, he hit the nail on the head when he said that seated cable rows work the rear deltoids. Yes, seated cable rowing works the rear deltoid more than any other muscle, with the possible exception of your lower back, and not in a good way. There's a rule in physics called opposite position loading. Whatever muscle is positioned directly opposite resistance will be the most loaded, whether that is your intention or not. Okay, so that is why seated cable rowing loads the rear deltoids the most, is because that is the muscle that is directly opposite the frontward pull of resistance, right? The trapezius doesn't even connect to the arm bone. So we're not working middle trapezius when the arm part of it is not working middle trapezius when you're doing a cable row. And the lats pull downward toward the lower 2/3 of the spine and in the back top part of the pelvis. So it's also not a great lat exercise, but it is true that it's a good, not the best, but a relatively good rear deltoid exercise. Now, having said what I just said, you'll notice when you looked at that video from the side, the direction of resistance is not directly opposite the rear deltoid, right? Because he was at a slight incline like this, right? He would have to get all the way like this in order to have that resistance be directly opposite the rear deltoid. And he's not. He's actually more sort of like opposite the trapezius, right? Now, you can take the rear deltoid, you can take any muscle and flex it while you're in any position and feel it. That doesn't mean that that's an efficient way of loading that muscle. What you will notice, though, is that he says bring your arms up bent. Now, if you were to go back and look at that video and freeze it right when he's at the top of the movement, you'll notice that his forearm, okay, let's do that. Now the seated version.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, right there. You can stop right there. Okay. Notice the forearm, which by default is the secondary lever of the deltoids, because the deltoids, all three heads, connect to the upper arm bone, not to the forearm, right? So they're pulling on the upper arm bone. They have no idea what the forearm is doing, except for the fact that based on its position relative to gravity, it will either, like if you do a straight arm side raise, it adds length to your upper arm bone. right? So it can magnify, it can add length, magnification to the upper arm bone, the primary lever, if it's straight. When it's bent, what you'll discover is you cannot keep the upper arm bone and the forearm bone on the same plane, right? As is evidence right there. The upper arm bone is going like this and the forearm bone is going like that. They're not on the same plane anymore. So now what you'll see is that that forearm, because it's attached at the elbow, wants to pendulum down to the base, right? The reason it's not doing that is because you have to involve the infraspinatus, the external rotator, in order to keep it from falling. The problem is the infraspinatus is much weaker, has much less strength capacity than the rear deltoid. So in order for you to load, adequately load the rear deltoid, you start straining the infraspinatus. If you keep the weight down to one that isn't going to strain the infraspinatus, then it'll underwhelm, under-challenge the rear deltoid. So this is not a good exercise. You know what, again, getting back to what I said before, the best thing to do is ask yourself, does this exercise meet the 15 criteria about opposite position loading, about alignment, about moment arm, of the things that we explain in our course? Does this exercise qualify? And that one right there, for the most part, doesn't qualify in any of the 15 points, right? I mean, at least not purely. It is slightly opposite position loading because you're leaning forward. If you were leaning back, it wouldn't be at all opposite position, but it isn't fully opposite position loaded. It's only like 20% opposite position loading. But in every other category, you're not really doing what that muscle does. You're sort of bringing the insertion toward the origin, but not as well as you could, right? So why waste time with these exercises? Why do exercises that are not the best?
I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification button and leave us your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.